time, we were getting those messages from a time we were really young. So those belief systems are really entrenched. As we start to talk about new belief systems that support a more balanced parent-child power, you're going to start to recognize that you feel really uncomfortable with that. Not a problem. That's just change. That's just difference. And so it's going to feel wrong. And I just want people to feel really comfortable just sort of listening. Don't hesitate to ask questions because I can clarify more. But some of this, as you start to hear it, if it's the first time you've heard it, is going to be challenging. And it probably won't be the last time you've heard it. So let's go ahead and get started. You have 3 sheets of paper, and one we're going to start with tonight is the 7 universal personal rights. So I think the hardest thing about really changing a power balance in any relationship, and tonight we're talking about parent-child, is really having to change the belief systems that were based on an authoritarian power balance, where the adults had all the power and the children were supposed to have no power. So what we've got is we've got a belief system that doesn't fit what we're trying to accomplish anymore. So as a result of that, we have to change belief systems in order to work on these techniques that give us more balance of power. So what we're talking about here are the 7 universal personal rights. So when we talk about these universal personal rights, they are reciprocal. So they are the way you should be engaging with your child. It should be how your child will eventually engage with you. Obviously, if they're really young, it's going to take a while for them to learn any belief system. In this case, your belief system. So we're going to start with number 1, and that is you have the right to respect from other people. There's a couple things I want you to write down on this. One is that respect is a behavior. This is really important. Respect is a behavior, not a feeling. And in the last couple generations, that's gotten very confused, and people treat it as a feeling. So kids will come home from school and say, I don't respect my teacher, meaning that they don't agree with them or they don't like them. And then they feel like they have the right then to be disrespectful to them. And so I want to be really clear. Respect is a behavior, and it's a behavior of integrity. And by a behavior of integrity, what I mean is if you are a person of integrity, if you have integrity, you treat people respectfully. Nobody has to earn your respect. It's about your integrity. If you're a person of integrity, you treat people respectfully. Now, there are basically 4 components of respect, and you might want to flip your sheet over so you have room to write. The 4 components of respect are, number 1, trust in the ability of another. Trust in the ability of another. The second component is interest in the point of view of another, other than your own. Let me repeat that. Interest in the point of view of another, other than your own. Now, I want to be really clear here. You could absolutely be interested in why someone thinks or believes the way they do, and absolutely disagree with them. It doesn't mean you have to agree. I think in the last couple of generations, that's gotten really confusing. So people will be disrespectful because they're fearful that if they show interest in another point of view, that it means that they are agreeing with that point of view. So for some people, interest feels like a stretch. And sometimes it's easier when you start to think about respectful behavior, if you would say curious. I'm curious about their point of view. rather than interested. That's easier for some people to sort of make that leap. So number two was interest in the point of view other than your own. The third is that you are willing to recognize and own your part of a problem without blame. Let me say it again. Willing to recognize your part of a problem without blame. And the reason I'm reiterating the without blame is that I really think that as a generation, that parents have been much more responsible about owning their part of a problem. I hear parents all the time in this generation saying, I'm really sorry I said that to you. I regret that I, did this behavior. And that is a huge change from an authoritarian style of parenting where it was considered to be a sign of weakness if a parent admitted that they made a mistake or that there was a problem that was partially theirs. And so I really, really love that that has happened. But because we had no model of that respectful behavior, many people in this last generation would add on there blame unintentionally. So they'd say, I'm really sorry I yelled at you this morning before school. But they don't stop there. They say, but if you'd put your shoes on when I told you to. In other words, it's your fault I yelled at you. So what we ended up with unintentionally is a generation of kids who were the most blameful generation that's ever existed. It didn't come in a void. It was because they heard you acknowledging you're part of a problem, but they heard you blaming rather than acknowledging. They heard you blaming it on someone else. So now your kids, when they recognize a problem, will say, well, I wouldn't have had to do blah, blah, blah if the teacher hadn't, made me do this or hadn't said this or whatever it might be. So I want to be really clear with this. Recognizing and owning your part of a problem stops there. You would say to your child, for example, I'm really sorry I yelled at you this morning. Now, if they wanted to come back after seeing that model over a period of months, weeks, years, they could say, I know, Dad, I should have put my shoes on when you told me. That would be owning their part of the problem. But it's not our job to police other people's integrity. So when we talk about respect, we continually work on our own respect and assume the model is hopefully going to make a difference in what our children see and do. The last component of respect is recognizing and owning we all have different feelings, even sharing the same experience. Recognizing and accepting others have feelings different than our own, even having the same experience. So we may find it comical, for example, when our kids might tumble running on a playground or something, and it just kind of is comical for us to see it. They don't feel like it's comical. They feel embarrassed or humiliated. And so it's important to really be clear that people can have different emotional responses even to the same experience. Those are the 4 components of respect. So if we're consciously, intentionally modeling those 4 components, then we're maintaining our integrity and teaching our children what it looks like to have the integrity to be respectful. So questions about respect before we move on. Okay. So the next universal personal right is you have the right to have needs, and your needs are as important as others' needs. Now, notoriously, women are known to have an issue with having clear boundaries. And this isn't because there's some innate flaw in being female, but that our socialization as females has been that everybody else's needs come before our needs. If you're a good daughter, your parents' needs come first. If you're a good friend, your friends' needs come first. If you're a good partner, your partner's needs come first. And certainly if you're a good parent, definitely your children's needs come first. And so with that belief system, it's really hard to really be able to have healthy boundaries. So you really have to believe that your needs are as important as other people's needs. So for example, your child may say to you, "Can you come and play Barbies with me?" And you feel like it is really your obligation as a good parent to go play with them. And I want to make that really clear. It's like you have the right to have needs. You may have to get dinner ready. You may have to put your feet up and take a breath. You may have to call a friend. Who knows what you have to do, but sometimes your needs are going to be more important than the people around you. And you have to believe that your needs are important if you're going to have healthy boundaries. So questions about that one. Now, because women are socialized to believe that everybody else's needs come first, and I'm not saying this, there aren't men who also don't have that. It depends on sort of your family of origin and so on. But with that belief system, male or female, there are going to be times when you are going to feel guilty about setting boundaries to meet your needs because of that socialization. It's going to make you feel guilty that you're getting your needs met. And what I want to remind people is that that's growth. I would rather have you spend this generation having some guilt and living and dealing with your guilt, but having better boundaries than the past generation where they were just resentful because they weren't able to set boundaries or to acknowledge their own needs. So guilt is basically more evolved than resentment. But you may struggle with guilt for much of this generation because it's such an ingrained belief system. So questions about needs.
Not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay. The third one is you have the right to ask that others respond to your needs, and others have that right as well. So let me say that again. You have the right to ask, not demand, that others respond to your needs, and others have that right as well. So I want to be really clear that one of the things that happened in an authoritarian style of parenting is that in order for our parents not to feel badly about their behaviors or their needs, is they would basically make it feel like you should know better than to ask something from them. So they'd say things like, "You know better than to ask me for a cookie. You know better than." In other words, I don't want to set a boundary. And so I'm going to make you responsible for that boundary by making you feel like you should have known, sort of shaming you into feeling responsible for their boundary. I don't want that. I want your kids to be able to ask you for anything. I want them to be able to ask people for anything. And then the person they're asking needs to decide if they want to meet that need, which we will talk about in a minute. So they can ask for anything. Now, with that said, they can ask more than one person to get their need met. And this is a really hard switch from what we've known in the past around power and boundaries from an authoritarian style of parenting. In the past, people had to have a quotes united front.
Hey, Candice.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just
Yes.
wanted to add, we have a question in the chat.
Yes, go ahead.
Of how do you combat guilt?
How to combat, I'm sorry, what?
How to combat guilt.
How to combat guilt. You know, I don't know. What I would say is that I want people to have guilt be part of their comfort zone. That may be as good as you can do in this generation. But I want you to keep reminding yourself that guilt means that maybe your children can have needs and set boundaries without feeling guilt. So resentment is what happens when you don't get your needs met and don't have boundaries. Guilt may be what you're experiencing while you're learning to set boundaries, and hopefully in a generation or two, there won't have to be guilt around that. So I would say just acknowledge it to yourself. Don't expect it necessarily to change, but remind yourself it's help. And that if you are feeling guilty, you've probably set a boundary that's moving and evolving towards help. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so that one, the next one we're talking about is you have the right to ask. Now, in the past, one of the things we had was the United Front, and that was considered sort of the model of what families had to do. Well, the United Front in parenting was probably one of the most dysfunctional and mythical belief systems that ever existed. You all knew in your family you grew up in which parent made decisions and which parent had to accommodate that decision in order for there not to be a problem with the other parent. And I don't like that inequality of parenting. I really want parents to be, number one, have their own belief systems. I want one parent to be able to think one way and another parent to think another way, and for them to model respectful difference. If you can't have respectful difference in your home, then how do you learn to have respectful difference in a community? And if you don't have in a community, how do you learn to be respectful about difference globally? So I really want people to have differences, but I want them to be respectful. So what it would look like is your child may hop up on the counter while you're cooking, and you say, I don't let you guys on the counter while I'm cooking. And they turn to you and they say, well, Daddy lets us be on the counter while he's cooking. I don't want you then to say, well, I can't believe Daddy would be so stupid as to let you on the counter. That's disrespectful difference. But you could say, Daddy believes that's okay, Mommy doesn't. Children don't have trouble with difference. Adults have trouble with difference. And you have an opportunity to help your children learn about respectful difference. We feel differently about sitting on the counter while we're cooking. Okay, so questions about that difference, that one of you may have a different boundary. Now, with that said, one of the things that would happen is, and has often happened, is that a child comes in, says to, let's use a mother this time, says to their mother, can I have a cookie before dinner? And she says, no, dinner's almost ready, no cookie. And they go in and they ask their dad for a cookie before dinner. And he's doing something on the computer, watching TV, and he says, sure, have a cookie. In the past, there would be a mom yelling at the dad, or yelling at the kid, I told you, no cookie. But they have the right to try to get that need met elsewhere. In the past, that dad would have basically then said, well, ask your mother. Well, I don't want them to ask their mother either, because that's really deferring and saying he has no power or anything. What I'd like to see happen is for that dad in that situation to say, hey, to his partner in the next room, when's dinner going to be ready? And if she says in about 10 minutes, then he would say, no cookie right now. And we can talk about this again later. But no cookie. Not, yes, you can have a cookie just because he didn't know when dinner was ready. Now, the other side of this is, let's say he did say yes. No big deal. He's thinking cookie before dinner. A child gets a cookie before dinner. Whoever sets the boundary is responsible for the outcome of the boundary. So if that child has a cookie before dinner, they don't eat dinner, but they're hungry again at 7:00, 7:30 before they go to bed, who fixes them dinner? Not mom. She set her boundary about no cookie before dinner. Dad's the one that gave them the cookie for dinner. So dad's the one fixing the snack at 7:30 at night. When we start to see this really equal intentional consideration of boundaries, we see way less of sort of manipulating behavior between good parent, bad parent kinds of stuff. So it really becomes a much healthier dynamic within the family. Okay, so questions about you have the right to ask. And so I'm going to move on, but go ahead.
Oh, no, we're good in the chat.
Okay. Before I move on, I just wanted to say this is probably number 3 we just talked about, is probably one of the hardest that people really struggle with around really changing a mindset that's going to move you to a healthier power balance in a family. So I just am saying to you, don't be surprised if you're being like, well, no, that's just not right. And we have to have a united front. It's like, I'm okay with this being uncomfortable. I'm just asking you to let it kind of simmer there and to practice it a little bit and see what happens. Okay, number 4, you have the right to choose whether or not to respond to another's needs and expectations. They have that right as well. What I want you to write in your notes under this one is, love does not equal obligation. This is really important to learn from a really young age, that love does not equal obligation. When you feel obligated to meet someone's needs, that's not intimacy, that's enmeshment. And enmeshment isn't safe. It feels like if I don't meet this need, I'm not going to be loved. Whereas when you choose to meet a need and you know you're going to be loved, whatever that choice is, then you've got intimacy. I really want your children to know the difference between obligation and choice, between enmeshment and intimacy. So in this case, you have the child who's asking you to go play Barbies with them. Now, what a lot of you do to try to sort of reframe or not to feel so guilty is you'll say things like, I would, but I need to go full clothes. Or I have to do dinner now, honey. Or. And you try to find a good reason why you can't meet that need. I don't want you doing that. What you end up getting is end up getting a child who parents will say, they just keep nagging me. They're so persistent. And I'll say, because you didn't say no. What they're thinking is, I could problem solve that. Well, you could play while you're folding clothes. You could play after you fold the clothes. You could play, and you'll be like, they're so persistent. And I'm like, no, they're problem solving, and you didn't say, I don't want to. And so many of you set this up over and over again. Your children aren't fragile. When you think about it, from the time they were knee high, you would say, do you want to help mommy pick up the toys? And they don't say, well, I would, mom, but they learn that eventually from us. They say, no. You say, do you want to come sit on daddy's lap? They say, no. They're really clear about love doesn't equal obligation. I don't want to teach them that behavior. We have to be just as comfortable saying, I don't want to play Barbies right now. I just want to put my feet up and read for a while. You'll be shocked at when you are that clear with kids that that persistence, quotes, drops away. You were clear about, I want to put my feet up and read.
Candice, we have a question.
Yes.
You are in an enmesh situation. Can you get out of it? And so how?
And in mesh situation, like with your kids you're talking about, whoever that person is.
R and R. They
Yes.
typed yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think that one of the nice things, depending on the age, so under the age of 7, just a little quick go back here about something. Under the age of 7, your kids are basically concrete learners. They learn by life, example, etc. After the age of 7, they start to become abstract thinkers, and you can talk about concepts and have discussions about concepts. So my answer to this would depend on if your kids are younger or older. If they are younger and concrete learners, what you may find is that the first time you set a clean boundary and say, I don't want to play right now, I just want to put my feet up, they may persist a little bit because they had learned that they just have to keep asking you to get a need met. And so you may see that, but they would eventually see that if you don't accommodate them, that when you say, I don't want to, that they will just go off and play. Now, if you have kids older than 7, you can talk to them about this. You can say, people can choose whether to meet a need or not. And you can have this little discussion with them and talk about, you get to choose to meet a need or not. So it depends on what age your kids at before you, in terms of how you deal with it. But in either case, you're going to be sure that you are clear with yourself that you're not obligated to meet that need, that you are choosing to meet that need. If they can get that need met in other way, you are obviously obligated to feed a new baby. They have no other way to get that need met. But if your children have another way to get a need met, if that includes boredom or hunger or whatever it is, you have no obligation to meet that need. Okay. Hopefully that kind of clarified for people. So related to that is you have the right to have all your feelings, no matter how challenging, negative, whatever word you want to use. So one of the things in this generation, particularly what we've seen, is parents are desperately always trying to keep their kids having positive emotions. We want them never to be disappointed. We want them never to be bored. We want them never to be sad, unhappy, guilty, scared. We will do anything to keep them having positive emotions. And what I want to really make clear here is that every human being has a right to their full spectrum of emotions. Our job as parents is not to set a boundary that keeps them having good emotions, happy, comfortable emotions. Our job is to set healthy boundaries, and they can have whatever emotion they have. It's okay for them to be bored. Boredom leads to creativity. It's okay for them to be disappointed. It leads to clearer communication and better planning. It's okay to be overwhelmed. It helps them understand how to better practice their time, whatever it might be. It's not our job to keep them from having an emotion. And so what we've done is we have children who think that if they're having a negative or an uncomfortable emotion, that something is wrong and someone needs to fix it for them. And so I really want it clear. It's like our children need every human emotion they have to be functional, resilient adults. And our job isn't to try to set our boundaries by the emotion they're having. Okay, so questions about that? So the next universal right is you have the right to express your feelings if you don't violate the rights of others. So you can be really frustrated with your kids. You can't call them names. That's a violation. They can be really angry with you. They can't hit you. That's a violation. So the piece that's important here is we have to be sure that we are modeling that we can have an emotion, but we're not violating anyone with that emotion. And we have to really be sure that we're holding our kids accountable to be able to have an emotion and not violate people with that emotion. So they have to learn how to manage their emotions, which is a whole another topic of emotional intelligence. But this is really important and really important for us to be clear that we have to be accountable about modeling, managing our emotions, and showing that emotion in a way that is not going to violate other people. Okay, so questions about that one? Okay. The last one is you have the right to show your abilities, enjoy your accomplishments, and take pride in yourself. Now, this one is interesting because we are definitely a culture and a generation where we literally clap when our babies fart. We think anything they do is amazing and wonderful until they hit about 4. And then we switch this belief system to don't brag, don't show off. And it's really confusing for kids because they've gotten all this reinforcement, and then there's this age where it's just suddenly shaming. So I'm reminding people there isn't an age where your kids shouldn't be able to show their accomplishments and take pride in themselves. There may be a period of time where you need to coach them a little bit about how that could look or things they could say, because how they do it may be inappropriate or a little rough around the edges. But I want them to always be able to feel good about their accomplishments and take pride in themselves. Okay, so questions about any of the universal personal rights right now? So these are basically your belief guidelines for what we're preparing you for now, which is that healthy power balance in a relationship.
So far, the chat is clear.
Okay, so kind of keep this handy because we may refer back to it as we talk about these other 2 handouts. So now grab your handout that says accommodate, collaborate, avoid, and compete. The 4 quadrants. I want you to do a couple things. In each corner of the quadrant, put quarter, 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 and quarter. 1 quarter, 1 quarter, 1 quarter, 1 quarter. At the bottom of the page, I want you to write, we're looking for consistency of value. Say it again, consistency of value, not consistency of rule. Authoritarian style of parenting was consistency of rule. So a lot of you are still carrying around all kinds of sort of guilt and pressure around being consistent. You may even have people talking to you about being consistent. And I'm telling you right now, I don't want consistency of rule. Consistency of rule does not teach what we're looking for. Consistency of value does. And then also at the bottom, put a little note to yourself. You'll always attempt to set your boundaries in context, in the moment, in other words. You will always attempt to set your boundaries in the moment. Okay. Now, the way you assess When you should have a boundary and what kind of boundary you have depends on, in the moment, the difference between your relationship and the issue. If in the moment the issue isn't, is there a question? Oh. In the moment, if the issue is less important than the relationship, you're going to accommodate your child. You're just going to give them what they want. So, for example, I would oftentimes accommodate what my kids wore to bed because my relationship with them at bedtime was more important than what they wore to bed. So I wouldn't necessarily argue with them about having to wear pajamas. I might just say, fine, hop into bed. Okay, in that moment. Now, collaborate are things like compromising. So put under here, compromise, giving choices, bargaining, all of those are collaborative approaches. And in this generation, one of the things is that we really felt like maybe the only way or the best way to have a healthy power balance with our children was to have them collaborate with everything. And so our children started feeling entitled that they had a say over every decision of parenting. And they'd be negotiating constantly about when they were going to eat, what they were going to eat, when they were going to go to bed, who they were going to see, what they were going to play. And it just exhausted parents because it was way too much power. They should only be able to collaborate a quarter of the time. And that is when the relationship is equally important to the issue. So I would probably collaborate around things like nutrition, where I really wanted them to have a healthy diet and I wanted to have a peaceful meal. So I might say, I'm fixing broccoli. If you don't want broccoli, grab yourself some carrot sticks. In other words, you still need to have healthy food, but I'm not going to argue about making you eat the broccoli. So, and the only time you collaborate is when the relationship and the issue are equally important, and that should only be about a quarter of the time. Okay, now compete. The next arena is health and safety only. Put a little note under that. Health and safety only. Yours or theirs, yours or someone else's. So it isn't just their health and safety, your health and safety, other people's health and safety. And if you are in that one, and it should be a quarter of the time, the only time you are actually competing where you have complete power is when the issue is more important than the relationship. So you will make your kids wear seatbelts and be in car seats because their health and safety is more important to you than if they're comfortable or want the freedom to move around. You have them wear helmets when they're riding bikes, even though they may not like to, it's health and safety. You may work on sleep training for really young children because you're getting sleep deprived. It's your health and safety. So you will take control of sleep. So compete is a quarter of the time, and the only time you're competing is health and safety. Okay. Then the next one is avoid. And avoid is when the relationship isn't important and neither is the issue. This is you are ready to go to bed. You see that your partner left the cap off the toothpaste. It drives you crazy that it gets all dry, but it is not worth getting him up or causing a fight at 10 o'clock at night. So you just put the silly lid back on and go to bed. That's avoid. This is your survival mode. You should be having things you avoid a quarter of the time. If you are attending to every little behavior your child has every minute of the day, you are going to be entirely bankrupt. So there are things that there are times you just don't care. So for example, you may be in finishing up dishes from dinner. It's 7:30 at night. You know there's 15 minutes before your kids go to bed. You hear them jumping on the couch in the other room. You don't say anything. Don't yell from the other room, get off the couch, get off the couch 20 times, because they know and you know you're not going to get them off the couch. You just want to get through that last. You don't care if the couch is jumped on. You don't care if they fall in that moment. You just want to get through that last 15 minutes. This is a void, and everyone should be avoiding a quarter of the time when the issue and the goal, neither one, are that important. Okay, so that's what it looks like. That's how you make the decision if you're going to actually just accommodate your kids or collaborate or whatever. In this generation, what people kind of got locked into for a while was they would get into this kind of accommodate, combination, accommodate, collaborate with their kids. And then they would feel the entitlement and they would start to feel resentment about how much their kids were just demanding and demanding and negotiating. And then they immediately would go into compete and they go to this authoritarian style that was so familiar to yourselves. And then you would feel really guilty because you didn't ever want to be that authoritarian parent and shame them or yell at them or hit them. And so you go right back into that being that accommodating, collaborating parent. You just flip flop back and forth. And it just doesn't work. And so what this does is it gives you a much more comprehensive, intentional way of really stepping back and saying to yourself, is this accommodation I need to do? Is this compete I need to do? What do I need to do in this moment? I'm going to give you an example because when I said you're looking for consistency of value, not consistency of rule, I want you to see how you move around on this. So one night, your child asked you for a cookie before dinner. Dinner is going to be an hour away. They haven't had much sugar. You're just going to accommodate them. You're going to say, sure, grab a cookie. The next night, they're going to ask you for a cookie before dinner. The dinner is almost ready. So you're going to say, why don't you grab yourself a cookie and save it for after dinner? You'll collaborate with them that night. The next night, they ask you for a cookie before dinner. They just got home from a birthday party where they had punch and cake. They had a lot of sugar, and you say, no cookies today, kiddo. You've had too much sugar. The next night, it's health and safety that night. The next night, you're in the living room. You don't have a clue what you're going to fix for dinner. You hear them getting into the cookies, and you're praying they bring you one. That's a void. The reason this is important to move around on and not have this strict rule of no cookies before dinner is the whole idea of discipline in parenting is that you are teaching your child to become a functional, self-regulated adult. When you have these rules, you are going to be inconsistent because that one night you don't feel like fixing dinner, it's going to look so inconsistent that they're just getting a cookie. Or why do they get it sometimes but not others? So I want your kids to literally hear you intentionally move around on this. So by the time, if you start with this when they are toddlers, by the time they are 4 or 5 years old, they're going to start to say things like, when's dinner? And if you say 10 minutes, they'll say, well, I haven't had much sugar. Can I get a cookie for after dinner? And you say, sure. Or they might come up to you and say, I suppose I can't have a cookie because I went to the party today. And you'll say, you're right, you've had enough sugar. Now you're starting to see that your kids are actually learning that there is intentionality and self-regulation. And how to do that self-regulation by learning the values, not rigid rules. Okay, so questions about that, this one we just did.
Not seeing anything in the chat.
You guys are amazing. Okay.
That was a great exercise. That was, wow, blew my mind.
Okay. Okay. Now keep this one available because you're going to interface these. So you kind of want both of them right in front of you. Now we're going to look at this nurture, structure, marshmallow, criticize one. And I want you to have them kind of next to each other so you can see. In this one, it isn't quarter, quarter, quarter. In this one, you're attempting to stay in the nurture structure side, and you're attempting to avoid marshmallowing and criticizing. Let me say that again. You want to try to stay in the nurture structure side, and you want to try to avoid marshmallowing and criticizing. So in this one, if you feel good about what you're doing and it's working for you, then you continue doing it, that you're nurturing, your boundary is good. So you may have your mother-in-law saying to you, you shouldn't be lying down with your 6-year-old. But if you like it, they go to sleep, it's working for you, then you lie down with that 6-year-old until they fall asleep. For you, that's nurturing. Is everybody clear about this? Now, can you ask your mother-in-law to do that with your child? No, because she would be resentful that she had to lie down with them till they fell asleep. She feels like they should go to sleep on their own. So what's nurturing to one person isn't necessarily nurturing to another. So you can't tell other people what their boundaries are. Other people have different boundaries. But we see this work all the time. Now let's go back to that universal personal right, where I said you don't always have to have a united front. Your kids learn very quickly that, daddy lies down with them when they go to sleep and mommy doesn't. She reads a book and she heads out. And they just get used to if daddy's lying down with them, they go to sleep. And they get used to if mommy's putting them down, she reads a book and she goes out. They accept change if you're respectful and consistent about what is a boundary for you, what works for you. So you don't have to have the same boundaries, and you can't tell people what their boundaries are. Now, the minute you start to feel resentful in any way, then you're starting to marshmallow. And when you're feeling that resentment, that's your red flag that you have to rethink your boundary. Now, it could just be you need to change your structure. So let's say you've been lying down with your child since they were a toddler. They're 6 now, and you're having to read 3 books and lay there till they fall asleep, and you're getting more and more resentful. You feel like your evening's just lost putting them to bed. Then I want you to reconsider the structure. And you may have to say, I'll read you 1 book and sing you a song, and then I'll turn a book on tape and I'm heading out of the room. And so you might change your structure until you don't feel resentful. But if you continue to lie down with that child, don't change your structure, get more and more resentful, you will eventually, sorry about that, you will eventually be critical of them. So any part of you that thinks that it's good to be marshmalling, if you're saying, well, but this is the only way they can go to sleep, it's like, I'm warning you, don't stay there. Because one of those nights you're going to say, I'm sick and tired of lying down with you. You're too old for me to lie down with. You're going to criticize them. And that is far more harmful than changing a boundary when you start to recognize your resentment. Is everybody clear about that? So I really, really want people to learn to listen to that resentment. Now, with that said, I want to remind you that number two, was it number two or three? You have the right to have needs, and your needs are as important. Is that for a lot of people, they'll say, I don't really recognize my resentment. I'm so used to feeling resentful and just doing it anyway that I only end up criticizing because I move past the resentment. It's not till I'm critical that I know that I probably need to set a boundary. And so it takes practice. But I think if you could say to yourself, really remind yourself, criticism is so much more destructive than setting a boundary to your children. So that you really start to pay attention sooner to, am I feeling resentful? And if I am, it's time to change my boundary. Now back to one of these. If you're accommodating, you may need to collaborate. If you are collaborating, you may need to compete. So it would be like, I'm feeling resentful. I'm in collaboration. I realize that I just need sleep. So I'm just going to go through the structure of getting them to sleep in their own bed tonight. And that would be compete, health and safety. So questions about how these two fit together. Eventually, you won't need the second one where you have to look at marshmallowing and criticizing. You'll know that if you're resentful, you need to change your boundary. Or if you've criticized, you'll recognize, shoot, I missed that first red flag of being resentful. And now, darn it, I criticized my child for no reason because I should have changed that boundary a long time ago or whatever. But for now, it's nice to have both of these that you can really use intentionally until all this new belief stuff really gets integrated into your head. Okay, so questions about this?
Chat is clear.
Okay, so like I said earlier, this is a lot of information and a lot of new information. So it takes a while. I just want to warn you, it takes a while for it to kind of get integrated. And so just keep practicing it. As you practice it, it just gets easier and easier and more integrated, and also feels more and more sort of comfortable to you compared to some of the belief systems that you've been using. So, and you may forget them, like you may look at them and go, now, what was that universal personal right? It's really useful, I think, to keep some of it handy where you can just literally grab it and look at it until you get it a little more integrated. But I'm just saying, don't feel badly if you tomorrow wake up and go, oh my God, now what was all that stuff I was supposed to do? So it's a lot of new information. And as we start to talk about discipline, we'll start to integrate this. So then we'll start to talk about what are the techniques that you use when you're collaborating? What is the communication you use when you're accommodating? What is the technique you use for health and safety? So you'll start to see how those two basically integrate as well. Okay, so questions.
Let's see. We have, how long do you think it takes to change the mindset of this? I have a 12-year-old. We have a very set routines.
Okay, so a 12-year-old with very set routines. And I'm assuming, and so you can keep writing if this is not accurate, or you can just open up, and if you're comfortable, you can also open up and just talk to me if you want, if that's okay. Is that okay to do, Sarah?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you can unmute yourself if you'd rather just talk and not have to keep writing back and forth.
Hi, Candice. I'm Tiffany.
There we go.
Hi, Tiffany. So I'm assuming you have a 12-year-old that really likes rituals and routines.
Yeah, we're in, I guess I'm married now, but we're in a mixed family, and her and I have very set routines from when she was very young, and then we're mixing family stuff together.
Yeah.
And we've been together a long time.
Exactly. And part of this also could be yours or both of your temperaments too, Tiffany, where you guys really liked your routines and you functioned well with your routines. And if she tends to be a little bit anxious, routines are comforting.
Yeah.
And so so for all of those reasons, there's nothing wrong with the fact that you did. What it sounds like, though, is that now with the change in your family dynamics, it's not necessarily always functional.
Not always the same, yeah, as she's used to being.
Exactly. Exactly. And so so a couple things. One is, I think the nice thing is she's old enough to really talk about this. And so I think it's really super important to talk about it with her and include her in as part of the process of change, where you'd say, okay, we've got some, differences now that we have to be respectful of their needs, and they have to, they'll be respectful of ours. And so we may not be always get the way we want to have it, and vice versa. And so be really open about that. Be really open with her about it's probably going to make you sometimes feel uncomfortable or anxious, and maybe even
angry.
Angry and resentful,
Angry.
because she probably feels a little entitled to it and feels resentful that someone's taking that away from her.
Yep.
But just speak the truth and then talk about, this is that with resentment, we have to make changes. Otherwise, we're just going to end up being critical and not have a happy family with anybody.
That's great. Thank you. I think the other piece of the dynamic is just that we're girls, and my husband grew up in a family of boys and had boys. And so now we're bringing that girl dynamic to the whole mix.
Exactly. And, honestly, it would be really, important to keep him really part of that process, so he can actually have some input about what his needs are as well.
That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. Anyone else? This is a good one. I was just going to say, those of you who are on here by yourself, but you're in partnerships, this is a good one to that they recorded, that your partner can listen to it, because it's really hard to communicate this, especially if you've just heard it for the first time. It's really challenging to communicate this to someone else and have them understand it. I think it'd be easier for them to hear it in context of the whole lecture tonight. So I think it's really a good one that you guys have actually recorded. So anyone else, questions or comments?
I am not seeing anything in the chat.
Also, Sarah, it's fine to open it up to just general questions too.
Okay.
So if people have something that they just are questioning about in general, about parenting or development or whatever, please feel free to ask.
Wonderful. In the chat, how would this work with a split family?
Family in two homes. So you can only do this basically with when you just have your boundaries in your house. I mean, if there's ever a time that this dynamic of, of having a consistent relationship, consistent in terms of that, not having a divided belief or thought or boundaries, that's part of the reason why this is so dysfunctional, is that we have to remember that over 52% of families now are single parent and or restructured families, or what we used to call, divorced families. And so with that said, and the two questions, we're both restructured families tonight. And so it is really important that you really pay attention to those universal personal rights, that you do not have to have a united front. You will have your own rules, your own values, your own priorities in your home. The other parent will have their own values, their own priorities in their home. And your child, if it's respectfully addressed, your child will basically have two different homes that they will decide which of those value systems that they are going to bring into their life. Now, sometimes this feels so scary to people for me to say, you don't have control over what happens in that other home. You don't, number one. And so it's a waste of time and energy and worry to try to have control. But I also want to reassure you that I have seen and believe that children move towards health. So if one parent is, even in the same home, if one parent is modeling a form of unhealth and the other parent is modeling healthy behavior, that child will move towards the healthy behavior. And so your power lies in being sure that you really keep your side of the road clean and really have integrity about your own decisions and boundaries and integrity of respect. And eventually, sometimes we'll see kids try on the other thing, but eventually kids move towards health. Okay, so any other questions?
Please feel free. Like to ask questions.
Okay, I guess we're good. Are you guys good?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Candice. You answered all my questions. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this was very helpful.
Good. I'm glad you came.
Veronica Wynn, thank you so much. Lori, thank you so much, Candice.
You're so welcome, everyone.
Have a good night.
You too. Have a good evening.
Thanks everybody for coming, and this is the first one of the year, so a little bumpy on my end, but I appreciate everybody coming and listening and getting all of this wonderful knowledge from Candice, and we will be looking forward to the next one.
Good. All right. Good night, you guys.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
You too.